Death. Judge Harold Winchester's gavel crashed down like thunder in the sweltering Alabama courtroom. That is this court's sentence for murder. The 67-year-old judge, silver-haired and pale-faced, leaned forward in his black robes with twisted satisfaction. In the defendant's box, Marcus Thompson trembled 17, black, wearing a faded gray t-shirt stained with motor oil. His long afro framed a face streaked with tears. The blood on his hands had never been the victim's. It came from wounds sustained trying to save a life. Marcus looked up, voice shaking but clear. "I request permission to call my father." Have you ever witnessed a single phone call overturn a death sentence? This story isn't just about a black teenager wrongfully condemned, it's about the moment true justice emerged from the darkest depths of prejudice. Marcus Thompson wasn't supposed to be here, standing in a defendant's box with his wrists shackled and his future evaporating like morning dew under the Alabama sun. At 17, he possessed the kind of quiet intelligence that made teachers lean forward when he spoke, the kind that had earned him a full scholarship to MIT despite growing up in South Side's forgotten corners. His appearance told a different story to those who chose to see only surfaces worn. Converse sneakers with holes near the toes, ripped jeans that had been mended and remended by his grandmother's patient hands, and that gray t-shirt bearing the honest stains of his evening job at Luis's auto repair shop. His hair grew long and natural, an afro that reached past his shoulders, each coil a testament to his mother's genetics and his grandmother's insistence that he never be ashamed of who he was. 8 years had passed since cancer stole his mother away, leaving him and his younger sister Maya in their grandmother's care. The small apartment on Southside's Grant Street had become their universe. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, walls thin enough to hear every neighbor's argument and celebration. Marcus had learned to study with sirens as his soundtrack, to concentrate on calculus while gunshots echoed 3 blocks away. His GPA of 3. 9 wasn't just a number, it was his escape velocity, his calculated trajectory out of poverty's gravitational pull. Every A on his report card represented nights when he studied by candlelight because the electricity had been cut off, mornings when he went to school hungry because there wasn't money for both food and Maya's medicine. The case that brought him here began with Robert Hayes, 45, white, owner of Hayes Grocery on the corner of 5th and Memorial. Hayes had been found dead in the alley behind his store at 11:47 p.m. on July 15th, skull fractured, wallet missing. The murder weapon, a kitchen knife bearing Marcus's fingerprints, had been discovered in a dumpster 2 blocks away. Those fingerprints came from 2 years prior when Marcus had worked at the store, stocking shelves and cleaning, including washing dishes in the back office where Hayes would eat his lunch. But context had no place in Harold Winchester's courtroom, where guilt was predetermined by melanin content rather than evidence. Judge Winchester represented 5 generations of Alabama judicial legacy, his family name etched into courthouse cornerstones and law library dedications. His great-great-grandfather had been a Confederate colonel who'd transitioned seamlessly into law after the Civil War, using the bench to continue the oppression he'd once enforced with a rifle. At 67, Harold wore his prejudices as proudly as his Armani suits and gold Rolex, believing with unwavering conviction that certain people, particularly young black men, carried criminality in their DNA like a hereditary disease. 20 years on the bench had given him ample opportunity to act on these beliefs, resulting in 12 wrongful convictions that would later be overturned, though not before destroying lives and families. The prosecution's star witness, Tommy Richards, was a methamphetamine addict with track marks mapping his arms like tragic constellations. For $5,000 in cash, money that mysteriously appeared in his possession the day after Hayes's murder, Richards swore he'd seen Marcus fleeing the scene, knife in hand, blood on his clothes. The truth that Marcus had been at the Hamilton Public Library with 3 friends, studying for his advanced placement physics exam, with time-stamped entry logs and security footage to prove it, had been dismissed by Winchester as circumstantial and easily fabricated. Marcus's court-appointed defender, John Peters, had arrived at trial reeking of bourbon, his files scattered, his arguments fumbling. Peters had been assigned 23 cases that month alone, each defendant getting perhaps an hour of his time total. The jury, 11 white faces and 1 Asian American, not a single black person among them, had deliberated for exactly 2 hours and 17 minutes before returning their verdict. Guilty of murder in the 1st degree. The foreman had read the verdict with a slight smile, as if pleased to be doing his civic duty in removing another threat from their community. The truth that no one in that courtroom knew yet was that James Morrison, Winchester's own brother-in-law, had killed Hayes over a drug debt, and that the entire case against Marcus had been orchestrated to protect the real killer. Morrison had been Hayes's silent partner in a methamphetamine distribution network that supplied half of Alabama. When Hayes had wanted out, threatening to go to the FBI, Morrison had silenced him permanently. The FBI had been investigating Morrison for 6 months, but that information hadn't reached this small courthouse in time to save an innocent boy from a death sentence. Winchester rose from his chair now, his black robes billowing with self-importance as he prepared to deliver what he clearly considered the highlight of his judicial career. The packed courtroom held 200 spectators, most of them white faces eager to witness what they'd been conditioned to expect. Another young black man facing the ultimate consequence for stepping out of line. The air conditioning had failed that morning, and the room stank of sweat and prejudice in equal measure. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of bodies leaning forward, hungry for the spectacle of condemnation. Local news cameras rolled, capturing what they assumed would be another routine death sentence in Alabama's eager embrace of capital punishment. "Marcus Thompson," Winchester began, his voice carrying the rehearsed cadence of someone who'd given this speech before, savoring each word like aged whiskey, "you stand before this court as a symbol of everything that plagues our community. Fatherless, impoverished, with that wild hair that speaks to your refusal to conform to civilized society's standards." He gestured dismissively at Marcus's afro, his lip curling with disgust that seemed almost theatrical in its exaggeration. "You are exactly what we've come to expect from your demographic: violent, lawless, irredeemable, a cancer on the body of decent society that must be excised before it spreads." The words fell like stones into still water, each one creating ripples of pain that Marcus felt in his chest, constricting his breathing, making his heart race with a combination of fear and rage he fought to control. He thought of his grandmother, Rosa Thompson, 73 years old and fighting diabetes, who'd taken 3 different buses to be here today, leaving her house at 5 in the morning because she refused to miss her grandson's trial. She sat in the 3rd row, her church dress the same one she'd worn to his mother's funeral, pressed perfect despite the heat, her hands folded in prayer, lips moving silently in conversation with a God she still believed in despite everything life had thrown at her. The dress had been a gift from his mother 20 years ago, carefully maintained because Rosa couldn't afford another one suitable for court. Beside her, Maya, only 14 but forced to grow up too fast, tried to look brave, her jaw set in determination even as Marcus could see her shoulders shaking with silent sobs she wouldn't let fall. "Your victim," Winchester continued, warming to his theme like a preacher finding his rhythm, his voice rising and falling with practiced emotion, was a pillar of this community. Robert Hayes employed 15 people, paid his taxes on time, contributed to local charities, coached Little League Baseball for 20 years. He had a wife of 23 years, 3 children who are now fatherless, 5 grandchildren who will grow up without their grandfather's guidance. He was a deacon at First Baptist Church, a member of the Rotary Club, a man who built his success through hard work and dedication. Winchester conveniently omitted Hayes's side business, the unexplained wealth, the rumors of young women who disappeared after working at his store. The judge lifted the case file, thick with documents that told a story Winchester had already decided before reading a single page, and threw it dramatically onto his desk, papers scattering like accusations across the mahogany surface. "This scholarship to MIT you claim to have earned? Please. We all know such documents can be forged. No institution of that caliber would accept someone of your background, someone who looks like you, talks like you, comes from where you come from. It's an insult to this court's intelligence to suggest otherwise. You probably can't even spell MIT, much less attend it." The crowd murmured its approval, a low rumble of vindication that filled the room like poisonous gas. Someone from the back shouted, "Give him the needle!" Another voice, female and shrill, added, "Clean up the streets!" A third called out, "One less thug!" An elderly man near the front spat on the floor in Marcus's direction. Winchester didn't call for order. Instead, he seemed to feed off the mob energy, his chest puffing with authority, his eyes gleaming with the intoxication of unchecked power. He raised his hand slightly, not to quiet the crowd, but to acknowledge their support, their validation of his prejudice. Marcus's legs gave out then, not from fear, but from 3 days of barely eating in county lockup, where meals were often forgotten for inmates awaiting death sentences. where the water came brown from the tap and tasted of rust and despair, where sleep was impossible with the constant threats from guards who saw him as already dead. The guards had made a game of walking past his cell every hour, dragging their batons against the bars, whispering about how painful lethal injection could be when the drugs weren't mixed right. His knees hit the floor hard, the impact sending shock waves through his already bruised body bruises from the accidental falls during booking, from the necessary restraint during transport. For the first time since his mother's funeral, tears came. They rolled down his cheeks as he remembered her last words, whispered through lips cracked from chemotherapy, her hand weak in his but her spirit still strong. Be strong, baby. Be better than they expect you to be. Show them who you really are, not who they think you are. Promise me you'll make something of yourself, that you'll take care of Maya and Grandma. Promise me you won't let this world break you. The court officer, a thick-necked man named Bradley with a Confederate flag tattoo barely hidden by his collar and breath that reeked of tobacco and last night's whiskey, moved to yank him up, grabbing a fistful of Marcus's hair and pulling until the young man cried out. The sound echoed through the courtroom, primal and raw, the sound of injustice made audible, of pain that transcended physical hurt. Look at him, Winchester sneered, his voice dripping with contempt that seemed to poison the very air, on his knees where he belongs. This is what happens when we allow these people to think they're equal to us. They get ideas above their station, forget their place, and innocent people die. His kind should know better than to aspire to anything beyond manual labor and servitude. The judge stood up from his chair, towering over the courtroom from his elevated bench, his robes making him look like some medieval executioner preparing for the killing blow. The American flag behind him seemed to mock everything it was supposed to represent: justice, equality, liberty for all. You know what your problem is, boy? Winchester continued, the racial undertone in boy sharp as a blade, cutting through any pretense of judicial neutrality. You thought you could escape your nature. Thought you could put on a clean shirt, get good grades, and suddenly you'd be one of us. But we see through it. We see what you really are beneath that thin veneer of respectability. You're a predator, a beast, an animal that walks on two legs but lacks the soul that makes one truly human. Marcus forced himself to stand, his scalp burning where the officer had pulled his hair, individual strands torn from their roots. Blood trickled from his wrists where the too tight handcuffs had cut into his skin during the struggle, mixing with the sweat that poured from every pore in the suffocating heat. The courtroom was laughing now, some people actually applauding as if they were watching a performance instead of a boy's life being destroyed, as if his pain was their entertainment, his despair their victory. Someone started a slow clap that spread through sections of the gallery, the sound like thunder, like judgment, like the drums of an execution that had already been decided. I've been doing this for 20 years, Winchester continued, his voice taking on a philosophical tone, as if he were imparting great wisdom to future generations. And in all that time, I've learned one truth. Certain people are born broken. No amount of education, no amount of opportunity, no amount of second chances can fix what's fundamentally wrong with them. It's in their blood, their bones, their very DNA. We've wasted billions of dollars trying to uplift them, to educate them, to civilize them, but you can't change nature. A wolf raised with sheep is still a wolf. He looked directly at Marcus, his blue eyes cold as winter frost, devoid of any humanity or compassion. You killed Robert Hayes because it's what your kind does. You destroy. You take. You contribute nothing but pain and loss. Your mother is probably looking down from heaven right now, ashamed of what her son has become. Thank God she died before she could see you revealed as the monster you truly are. That broke something in Marcus. His mother, who had worked 3 jobs to keep them fed, who had read to them every night despite exhaustion that made her hands shake, who had died apologizing for leaving them too soon, his mother would never be ashamed of him. She had believed in him when the world didn't, loved him when the world wouldn't, fought for him until her last breath. The mention of her in Winchester's filthy mouth was a desecration that Marcus couldn't bear. Don't you dare speak about my mother, Marcus said, his voice stronger now, finding strength in his anger, in his love for the woman who had given everything for him. You don't have the right to even think her name. Winchester laughed, a sound like breaking glass, sharp and dangerous. Or what? You'll kill me too? Show your true nature to everyone here? Prove everything I've said about you? He turned to the crowd, gesturing dramatically. You see? Violence. Always violence. It's their only response, their only language. They speak with fists and knives and guns because they lack the intelligence for words, the civilization for discourse. The sentence is death by lethal injection, Winchester announced, raising his gavel high, the fluorescent lights catching its polished surface like an executioner's blade. To be carried out at the earliest possible date allowed by law. You will be transported to Holman Correctional Facility immediately, where you will be housed on death row until your execution. The people of Alabama will sleep safer knowing you're removed from society permanently. Your death will serve as a warning to others like you who might think they can prey on decent folks. The gavel was about to fall, sealing Marcus's fate with the finality of a tomb door closing, when Marcus spoke again, his voice cutting through the celebration like a blade through silk. Your Honor, I have the right to make a phone call before being transferred to death row. It's guaranteed by law, the same law you swore to uphold when you took your oath of office. Winchester's face reddened, the color rising from his collar like mercury in a thermometer, his composure cracking slightly at this unexpected assertion of rights. You want to call your gang? Your drug dealer? Your baby mama? He laughed cruelly, the sound echoing off the courtroom walls. Oh, wait, you probably don't even know who your father is, do you? Another statistic. Another fatherless black boy who thinks the world owes him something. Probably got 6 different men who could be your daddy, none of them worth a damn. The courtroom erupted in laughter, the sound cascading from the galleries like a waterfall of hatred. Someone yelled, "His daddy's probably in prison too," another shouted, "or dead in an alley somewhere." A woman near the front added, "Probably has 10 kids by 10 different women himself." The mockery was a physical presence, pressing down on Marcus from all sides, trying to crush him into nothing, into the stereotype they needed him to be to justify their hatred. But Marcus stood taller, his spine straightening with a dignity that seemed to surprise even him, drawing on reserves of strength his mother had instilled in him, his grandmother had nurtured in him. He reached for the phone the court officer reluctantly provided, the black plastic device feeling like a lifeline in his trembling hands. His fingers, though shaking from exhaustion and emotion, dialed a number he'd memorized years ago, a number he'd never used for voice calls, but only for receiving monthly letters that arrived like clockwork, teaching him about law through stories and parables, preparing him for a world that would judge him before knowing him. The courtroom fell silent as the phone rang once. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden quiet, bouncing off the walls like a challenge to everything Winchester represented, twice. People leaned forward, curious despite themselves about who this condemned boy would call in his final moments of freedom, 3 times. Even Winchester seemed intrigued, a smirk playing on his lips as he anticipated the voice of some criminal associate or absent parent who wouldn't even answer. Then a deep voice answered, resonating through the speaker Marcus had deliberately turned to maximum volume, filling the courtroom with its authority, its gravitas, its power. Elijah Thompson speaking. "Dad," Marcus said, his voice breaking on the single syllable, years of longing compressed into 3 letters, tears flowing freely now. "They've sentenced me to death." There was a pause, just long enough for Winchester to smirk and mutter loud enough for the front rows to hear, "Another deadbeat about to get the news, his bastard is a killer. Probably drunk or high, wherever he island, these people never take responsibility for their offspring." Then the voice spoke again, calm and controlled, but with an undertone that made everyone in the room unconsciously lean forward, as if pulled by invisible strings, as if the very air had changed composition. "Put me on speaker, son. I want to address the court. I want everyone to hear this." Marcus hit the speaker button with a trembling finger, and Elijah Thompson's voice filled the courtroom like rolling thunder, like the voice of judgment itself, like truth finally breaking through the lies. "This is Justice Elijah Thompson of the United States Supreme Court. I'm looking at case number 2024AL7829, Alabama versus Marcus Thompson. I've been monitoring this travesty of justice from the beginning through federal channels, and I'm currently dispatching a federal legal team to that courtroom. They'll arrive within 15 minutes, and I strongly advise everyone present to remain exactly where they are." The silence that followed was absolute, as if the world had stopped spinning on its axis. Winchester's face drained of all color, becoming as pale as the marble pillars flanking his bench, his mouth opening and closing without sound like a fish pulled from water, and gasping for air that wouldn't come. The gavel slipped from his fingers, clattering to the floor with a sound that seemed to echo forever, bouncing once, twice, 3 times before rolling to a stop against the bailiff's feet. 200 people sat frozen, as if someone had hit pause on reality itself, as if they were afraid that any movement might shatter the illusion and return them to their comfortable prejudices. Judge Winchester, Elijah continued, his voice now carrying the full authority of his position, each word precise and devastating, like surgical strikes against the fortress of prejudice that had stood unchallenged for decades. I have before me FBI documentation that proves my son's innocence beyond any shadow of doubt. Security footage from the Hamilton Public Library shows Marcus present from 9 p.m. until 2 a.m. on the night of the murder, studying for his AP Physics exam with 3 classmates. The timestamp data has been verified by federal forensic analysts. 3 witnesses, Sarah Chen, Michael Roberts, and Jennifer Washington, have provided sworn affidavits that they were studying with Marcus, and their testimony has been verified through independent investigation. Winchester's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, his hands gripping the edge of his bench until his knuckles turned white, his entire world collapsing around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. The crowd began to shift restlessly, phones appearing in hands as people started recording what was quickly becoming a historic moment, the small screens capturing a giant's fall, a system's exposure, a lie's unraveling. Furthermore, Elijah's voice grew harder, each word a hammer blow to Winchester's crumbling authority, each sentence another nail in the coffin of his career. Tommy Richards confessed to the FBI this morning at 6:47 a.m. that he was paid $5,000 to provide false testimony. He's provided bank records, text messages, and recorded conversations proving the payment came from your brother-in-law, James Morrison, who is the actual killer. Morrison was arrested an hour ago after DNA evidence found under Robert Hayes' fingernails proved a 100% match. The FBI also has security footage from the house next door showing Morrison leaving the scene at 11:49 p.m., blood visible on his white shirt, carrying the murder weapon. The first reporter burst through the courtroom doors, Sandra Matthews from CNN, who'd been covering the courthouse beat for 15 years and had never seen anything like this. Her cameraman was right behind her, already rolling, broadcasting the scene live to millions. Within minutes, 15 more journalists flooded in, their cameras capturing Winchester's transformation from authoritarian judge to cornered animal, from predator to prey, from judge to judged. The harsh lights of their cameras illuminated the sweat now pouring down Winchester's face, each drop a confession of guilt. This is impossible, Winchester stammered, his voice barely above a whisper, his hands shaking visibly now, his entire body seeming to shrink into his robes. The evidence, the knife, the witness. I followed proper procedure. The knife my son touched 2 years ago when he worked at that store? Elijah's voice cut through Winchester's protests like a scalpel through diseased tissue. When he was 15 and trying to earn money to help his grandmother pay rent? When Robert Hayes himself wrote a recommendation letter for Marcus's college applications, praising him as the most honest and hardworking employee he'd ever had? Yes, Judge, we know all about that knife. We also know that you suppressed Hayes's letter from evidence, that you instructed the prosecutor to exclude it as irrelevant character testimony. We have the emails, Harold. We have everything. The crowd gasped at this revelation. Several people who had been recording put their phones down, suddenly ashamed of their participation in this spectacle. The woman who had shouted for Marcus to get the needle covered her face with her hands, realizing she had called for the death of an innocent child. Elijah continued, his voice now addressing not just Winchester but the entire courtroom, the entire viewing audience that was growing by the second as the live stream went viral. We also know about the 12 other black men you've wrongfully convicted over your career, Judge Winchester. Deshaun Williams, serving 17 years for a robbery he didn't commit, the real perpetrator, confessed 5 years ago, but you sealed the records. Jamal Patterson, life without parole for a murder that happened while he was in another state at his mother's funeral. You suppressed his alibi witnesses, threatening them with obstruction charges if they testified. Andre Mitchell, 20 years for a rape where the victim herself said it wasn't him. You instructed the jury to disregard her testimony, saying she was confused by trauma. With each name, Winchester seemed to shrink further into his robes, becoming smaller, older, more pathetic. The crowd was recording everything, and the live stream comments were exploding with outrage and calls for justice. People who had been cheering for Marcus's execution moments ago were now typing furious demands for Winchester's arrest, their transformation as swift as it was complete. The Department of Justice has been building a case against you for 3 years, Harold, Elijah said, using Winchester's first name with deliberate disrespect, stripping away the title that had shielded his prejudice for 2 decades. We have recordings of you using racial slurs in your chambers. We have testimony from court staff about you predetermining guilt based on defendant's race. We have financial records showing payments from private prisons that profit from your high conviction rate. You haven't been dispensing justice, you've been running a conviction mill, feeding young black men into a system that generates profit from their suffering. Marcus remained standing, his back straight despite exhaustion that threatened to topple him, his eyes never leaving Winchester's face, watching as the man who had wielded absolute power moments ago crumbled like ancient parchment exposed to air. The crowd that had been baying for his blood was now turning their phones toward the judge, capturing his humiliation in high definition, live-streaming his downfall to the world. The live-stream viewer count hit 50,000, then 100,000, then 500,000 and climbing. Comments flooded in from around the world, the hashtag number Justice for Marcus already trending #1 globally. Your pattern is clear, Harold, Elijah continued, his voice now carrying the weight of historical reckoning, of decades of injustice finally being exposed. Young black men appear before you, and regardless of evidence, they're convicted. You've perverted justice to serve your prejudices, and you've done it while wearing the robes that represent equality under law. You've turned the courtroom into your personal lynching ground, using a gavel instead of a rope, hiding your hatred behind procedure and precedent. A commotion at the door announced the arrival of Elijah's legal team, 10 federal attorneys in sharp suits, their presence commanding immediate attention, accompanied by 5 FBI agents whose badges gleamed like accusations under the fluorescent lights. But all eyes were on the man who walked in behind them. Elijah Thompson moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd fought bigger battles and won, who'd stood before the highest court in the land and argued for justice, who'd spent his entire career preparing for this moment. At 52, he was the youngest black Supreme Court justice in history, appointed after a career that read like a testament to excellence achieved despite systemic opposition. But he wore his power lightly, dressed in a simple gray suit that could have come from any department store, his appearance deliberately modest in contrast to Winchester's ostentatious display of wealth and authority. His face, which Marcus had only seen in photographs and brief video calls, showed the wear of years spent fighting injustice, lines earned in courtrooms and chambers where he'd been the only black face, the only voice for the voiceless. He walked straight to his son, each step measured and deliberate, cameras tracking his movement, the world watching a father reunite with the son he'd had to keep at a distance for both their protection. For a moment, the two men just looked at each other across 17 years of distance, 17 years of choices made for protection and survival, 17 years of love expressed through letters and lessons rather than presence. Marcus saw in his father's eyes all the pain of their separation, all the nights Elijah had probably sat alone wondering if he'd made the right choice, all the birthdays and holidays missed in service of a greater purpose. Then Elijah pulled Marcus into an embrace that contained all those years, all those missed moments, all the love that had been compressed into monthly letters and distant observation. "I'm here now," Elijah whispered, loud enough for the cameras to catch, his voice breaking with emotion he'd held back for nearly 2 decades. "I'm sorry it took this long. I'm sorry I had to stay away, but I've been watching, son. Every day I've been watching and preparing for the moment you might need me. And I swear to you, this ends now." Then he turned to Winchester, and his expression hardened into something that made even the FBI agents step back, something primal and protective, the face of a father whose child had been threatened, combined with the righteous anger of a judge who'd seen too much injustice. "Harold, we need to talk about justice. Real justice. Not the perverted version you've been dispensing from that bench. Sit down. Your performance is over." Winchester tried to maintain his authority, straightening his robes with shaking hands, lifting his chin in a gesture that now seemed pathetic rather than powerful. "I've been a judge for 30 years. I've served this community with distinction." "You've been a disgrace for 30 years, Elijah interrupted, his voice cutting through Winchester's protests like truth through lies. "You've terrorized this community, destroyed families, perverted everything that bench represents. You're done talking, Harold. It's time for you to listen. It's time for you to understand what you've really done, not just to my son, but to hundreds of innocent people." The crowd was absolutely silent now, 200 people barely breathing as they witnessed something unprecedented. A Supreme Court justice confronting a corrupt judge in real time, with the whole world watching through smartphone screens, history being written in real time, justice being born from injustice. Even the journalists had stopped their chatter, recognizing they were witnessing something that would be remembered for generations. "Let me tell you what power really is," Elijah began, moving closer to the bench, his voice carrying the weight of personal experience, of nights spent in jail cells for crimes he didn't commit, of decades fighting a system designed to destroy him. Power isn't crushing those beneath you, it's lifting them up. Power isn't silencing the innocent, it's giving them voice. Power isn't predetermined verdicts based on prejudice. It's the courage to see past bias to find truth. He paused, looking around the courtroom at the faces that had been so eager for Marcus's blood, now unable to meet his gaze. "When I was 15, the same age my son was when he worked at Hayes's store, I was walking home from school in a white neighborhood where my mother worked as a maid. My crime? Being black after dark. I was arrested, held for 48 hours, no phone call, no lawyer, beaten until I confessed to a burglary I didn't commit. The officer told me I was lucky he didn't shoot me on sight, that I should be grateful for his mercy." He moved closer to Winchester's bench, each step deliberate, each word chosen with surgical precision. That officer's name was Harold Winchester, Jr., your son. The apple, as they say, doesn't fall far from the tree. He's now a police captain in Birmingham, investigated 7 times for excessive force against black suspects, never charged because officers like him protect judges like you, and judges like you protect officers like him. It's a cycle of corruption that's destroyed countless lives, including nearly destroying my son's life today. Gasps rippled through the crowd like waves on a disturbed pond. Winchester's son, the pride of his family, the one whose picture sat prominently on the judge's desk in a silver frame, exposed as another link in the chain of systemic racism. Several people in the crowd lowered their phones, suddenly uncomfortable with their own complicity, their own silence in the face of obvious injustice. "You ask what gives people like my son the right to think they're equal," Elijah continued, his voice rising now, filling the courtroom with righteous anger that had been building for decades. "The Constitution gives him that right. The Declaration of Independence proclaims it self-evident. Every principle this nation claims to stand for demands it. But you've treated those principles like toilet paper, haven't you, Harold? You've wiped yourself with them every time you predetermined a young black man's guilt, every time you dismissed exculpatory evidence, every time you allowed prosecutors to strike black jurors until only white faces remained." "I was protecting the community," Winchester protested weakly, his voice barely audible now, a whisper of its former authority. "Which community?" Elijah shot back, his voice cracking like a whip. "The white community? The wealthy community? The community that votes for you? Because it certainly wasn't the community where my son's grandmother struggles to pay rent despite working as a hospital cleaner for 40 years, where she's cleaned the blood and waste of people who would cross the street to avoid her on the sidewalk. It wasn't the community where his little sister has to walk past drug dealers to get to school because the city won't fund proper police patrols in black neighborhoods, but somehow has money for 3 police stations in white areas with lower crime rates." He pulled out a folder thick with documents, each page a life destroyed, a future stolen, a family shattered. The folder itself seemed to carry weight beyond its physical presence, as if it contained the accumulated suffering of decades. 12 wrongful convictions that we know of, Harold. But how many more? How many young men are rotting in prison right now because you saw their skin color and decided their guilt before hearing a word of evidence? How many mothers are crying themselves to sleep believing their innocent sons are guilty because you convinced them with your authority, your position, your perversion of justice? He began reading from the files, each name a bell tolling for justice delayed. Deshaun Williams, 17 years for a robbery he didn't commit. Security footage proved he was at work during the crime, but you ruled it inadmissible because the timestamp was unclear, even though 3 witnesses confirmed he was there. The real perpetrator, Thomas Morrison, another relative of yours, confessed 5 years ago, but you sealed the record citing procedural concerns. Winchester's face had gone gray, sweat pouring down in rivulets that soaked his collar, staining it dark with his fear. The crowd was utterly silent, many crying as they realized the magnitude of what they'd been witnessing for years without seeing. "Jamal Patterson," Elijah continued relentlessly. "Life without parole. for a murder that happened while he was in another state at his mother's funeral. A funeral you knew about because his lawyer filed for a continuance that you denied. You suppressed his alibi witnesses, threatening them with obstruction charges if they testified. His mother died believing her son was a killer, Harold. She died with a broken heart because of your lies. Andre Mitchell, 20 years for a rape where the victim herself said it wasn't him. You instructed the jury to disregard her testimony, saying she was confused by trauma and unreliable due to emotional distress. She spent 20 years in therapy, not because of the rape, but because she knows an innocent man is in prison and you wouldn't let her truth be heard. Terrell Johnson, executed 3 years ago for a murder committed by James Morrison, the same James Morrison who killed Robert Hayes. You knew Terrell was innocent, Harold. The FBI has emails between you and Morrison discussing how to frame him. Terrell's last words were, "I forgive you all." He forgave you, Harold, but his blood is on your hands. With each name, Winchester seemed to physically diminish, aging years in minutes. The crowd was recording everything, broadcasting this litany of injustice to the world. The live stream viewer count had passed 2 million, with comments flooding in from every continent, in dozens of languages, all expressing the same horror and outrage. "You want to know the difference between you and me?" Elijah asked, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more power than a shout. "We both have power, we both have authority, but I use mine to protect the innocent, while you use yours to destroy them. I use mine to seek truth, while you use yours to bury it. I use mine to serve justice, while you use yours to pervert it. You've turned this courtroom into a factory of injustice, and you've done it with a smile on your face, sleeping well at night on sheets paid for by the private prisons that profit from your convictions." Winchester tried one more time to salvage something, anything, from the wreckage of his career. "The statistics show that young black men commit more crimes." "Stop." Elijah's voice was like a gunshot in the silent courtroom. "Do not quote statistics at me when you're the one creating them. Every wrongful conviction becomes a statistic. Every innocent man you send to prison becomes part of the narrative you use to justify sending the next one. You're not responding to crime, you're manufacturing criminals. You're creating the very statistics you claim to be addressing. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy powered by prejudice and funded by corporations that profit from human suffering." He turned to address the cameras directly, knowing that millions were now watching across the country and around the world. "This isn't just about my son, though God knows that would be enough. This is about a system that allows men like Harold Winchester to operate with impunity for decades. It's about a nation that claims to believe in justice while perpetuating injustice. It's about the thousands of Marcus Thompsons who don't have a father on the Supreme Court to save them, who are sitting in cells right now for crimes they didn't commit, who will die there unless we act." Then, looking back at Winchester, his eyes burning with controlled fury, "You asked my son if he even knew who his father was, as if being raised by a single grandmother was evidence of criminality. You used his father's absence as proof of his guilt. Well, let me tell you why I was absent, Harold. I stayed away to protect him from people like you." Elijah's voice grew thick with emotion as he continued, tears now visible on his face. "Every time a young black man achieves something extraordinary, people like you look for ways to tear him down. If they'd known Marcus was my son, you would have found a way to use it against him, claimed he thought he was above the law, that he was entitled, that he was getting special treatment. So I stayed away. I watched from a distance as he grew up without me, as he wondered why his father couldn't be there, as he achieved everything I dreamed he would achieve and more." He looked at Marcus, his voice breaking. "I've watched every report card, every science fair, every basketball game through photographs and videos his grandmother sent. I've guided him through letters, teaching him about law and justice through stories because I couldn't teach him in person. And despite growing up without me, despite poverty that would have broken most spirits, despite every obstacle your society placed in his path, he earned a full scholarship to MIT. He has a 3.9 GPA. He works evenings and weekends to help support his grandmother and sister. He tutors younger kids in math for free. He volunteers at the food bank. He reads to elderly people at the nursing home. He is everything you could never be: decent, hardworking, honest, compassionate, and forgiving." Elijah pulled out his phone, the screen bright in the dim courtroom, showing a video that would change everything. This is security footage from the Hamilton Public Library, time-stamped 11:47 p.m. on July 15th, the exact time of Robert Hayes' murder. There's my son, studying physics with 3 classmates, clearly visible, clearly innocent. The library is 8 miles from Hayes's store. Even if he could teleport, he couldn't have been in both places. This is the evidence you called fabricated. This is the alibi you dismissed as convenient. He swiped to another video, the image quality crystal clear, damning in its clarity. And this is James Morrison, your brother-in-law, leaving Hayes's store at 11:51 p.m. with blood on his shirt and a knife in his hand, the same knife you claim my son used, even though Marcus hadn't been in that store for 2 years. The FBI has been investigating Morrison's drug operation for 6 months. Hayes was his partner until he tried to quit the business, wanted to go straight for his grandchildren. Morrison killed him to keep him quiet, to protect the operation that's been funding your campaigns for the past decade. The crowd gasped as the video played on the courtroom's monitor, commandeered by the FBI tech team. It clearly showed Morrison, his face visible, his movements deliberate, disposing of bloody clothing in a dumpster before getting into his car, a car registered to Winchester's wife. Winchester's face had turned gray, sweat pouring down his cheeks despite the courtroom's sudden chill. The truth was written in every line of his face, in the trembling of his hands, in the way his eyes darted toward the exits, as if calculating escape routes that no longer existed. I couldn't have known. You didn't want to know, Elijah corrected, his voice sharp with accusation. Morrison came to you after the murder. We have the security footage of him entering your house at 2:47 a.m. on July 16th. He knew you'd railroad any young black man to protect him, and you did exactly that. You took an innocent boy studying for his future studying physics, the same physics that might one day help him cure cancer or solve climate change or explore the stars, and you tried to end his life to protect a drug-dealing murderer who happens to share your skin color and your last name. The FBI agent stepped forward then, their movements coordinated and official. The lead agent, Patricia Williams, a tall black woman who'd spent her career fighting the very corruption she was now addressing, spoke with clear authority. Judge Harold Winchester, you're under arrest for conspiracy to obstruct justice, judicial misconduct, and violation of civil rights under color of law. You have the right to remain silent. This is preposterous, Winchester shouted, finally finding his voice as the handcuffs appeared, his face red with indignation and fear. I'm a sitting judge. I have immunity. You can't. We can and we are, Agent Williams replied calmly, her voice carrying the satisfaction of years of investigation finally bearing fruit. We've been building this case for 3 years, Judge Winchester. We have recordings of your conversations with Morrison planning this frame-up. We have bank records showing payments from private prisons that profit from your high conviction rates, $50,000 per conviction, deposited in offshore accounts. We have testimonies from court staff about your use of racial slurs in chambers, your practice of referring to black defendants as animals and predators before their trials even began. She continued as the handcuffs clicked around Winchester's wrists, the sound echoing in the silent courtroom. We have evidence of jury tampering in 47 cases. We have proof you've been taking bribes from the prosecution to ensure convictions. We have documentation of threats made against defense attorneys who tried too hard to defend their clients. This is just the beginning, Harold. By the time we're done, you'll be lucky if you only get life in prison. As the handcuffs clicked around Winchester's wrists, the same kind that had cut into Marcus's skin just an hour ago, the crowd erupted. But it wasn't celebration. It was something deeper, more complex, a collective exhalation of recognition that they'd witnessed something transformative, something that would ripple outward in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Some people were crying, others were praying, still others were calling family members to tell them what they'd witnessed. Within an hour, the video had 10 million views across social media platforms. Number Justice for Marcus became the #1 trending topic globally, but it was quickly joined by number Systemic Reform, and number Never Again, and number The Call That Changed Everything. News networks interrupted regular programming with breaking, Supreme Court Justice Saves Son from Death Row, exposes decades of judicial corruption. The White House released a statement calling for immediate judicial reform. The Attorney General announced a federal investigation into every death penalty case in the past 20 years. Protesters gathered outside courthouses in 50 cities, demanding review of cases involving racial bias. The dominoes fell quickly after that, each revelation triggering the next in a cascade of truth that couldn't be stopped. Morrison, faced with overwhelming evidence and the loss of his protector, confessed not just to Hayes's murder but to 6 others, all blamed on young black men who were serving life sentences. He revealed a network of corruption that reached into the police department, the prosecutor's office, the state legislature, even the governor's mansion. Names were named, evidence was provided, and within days, 47 officials were under federal investigation. Tommy Richards, granted immunity for his testimony, revealed the full extent of the conspiracy against Marcus. 3 police officers had coached him for hours on what to say, showing him pictures of Marcus, making him memorize details about the night that never happened. They'd threatened him with life in prison on manufactured drug charges if he refused, and promised him money and protection if he cooperated. "They told me the kid was guilty anyway," Richards said through tears at his deposition. "They said all these kids are guilty of something. Might as well be this. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. I almost helped kill an innocent boy." Those officers, Captain Harold Winchester Jr., Lieutenant Michael Morrison, and Sergeant David Duke, were arrested within hours, their own communications, revealing a pattern of evidence tampering going back 15 years. Text messages between them discussed cleaning up the streets and taking out the trash, with black suspects consistently referred to in dehumanizing terms. One message from Winchester Jr. read, "Got another one for Dad to process. Young buck, perfect for the prison pipeline." The Alabama governor, facing mounting pressure and threats of federal intervention, ordered an immediate review of every death penalty case from the past decade. The results were staggering. 43% showed signs of racial bias, prosecutorial misconduct, or judicial malfeasance. 12 other states announced similar reviews within days, understanding that Alabama's problem was America's problem. The FBI expanded their investigation to 487 cases nationwide, showing signs of racial bias in conviction, creating a task force that would eventually become a permanent division of the Justice Department. They uncovered a network of corrupt judges, prosecutors, and law enforcement officials working with private prison companies to ensure a steady stream of convictions. The scandal reached the highest levels of multiple state governments, with 2 governors eventually resigning and 17 state legislators being indicted. But the most powerful moments came when other victims began speaking out, their voices joining in a chorus that could no longer be ignored. Martha Williams, whose son DeMarco had died in prison serving a sentence for a crime he didn't commit, another Winchester conviction, stood before the cameras with tears streaming down her face, her voice breaking but determined. "For 10 years I've known my baby was innocent. For 10 years nobody would listen. They told me I was in denial, that I couldn't accept what my son had done. The prosecutor said I was enabling him by believing his lies. But I knew my boy. I raised him. He wasn't capable of what they said he did." She held up a photograph of DeMarco, young and smiling in his high school graduation gown. He wanted to be a teacher. Said he wanted to give back to the community, help kids like him see that there was a way out besides the streets. He died in prison 3 days before the real killer confessed. 3 days. If Judge Winchester had allowed the DNA evidence we requested, my boy would be alive. He'd be teaching now. Maybe he'd have children of his own. Instead, I visit his grave every Sunday and tell him I'm still fighting for him. Jerome Davis, who'd served 15 years for a robbery Winchester had pinned on him despite 3 alibi witnesses, spoke through sobs that shook his entire body. "I lost everything. My wife divorced me because she believed I was guilty. The judge was so convincing, so authoritative. My children grew up without me. My daughter doesn't even remember me. My son joined a gang because he didn't have a father to guide him. He's in prison now, and I can't help but think if I'd been there. My mother died believing I was a criminal. Her last words to me were, 'I forgive you for what you did.' She forgave me for something I didn't do, and I never got to tell her the truth." Sarah Chen, one of Marcus's study partners from that night, came forward with her own story. "I tried to testify. I went to the prosecutor's office and told them Marcus was with us all night. They said I was lying, that I'd been paid off or threatened. They said if I testified, they'd investigate me for perjury. I was 17 and terrified. I'm so sorry, Marcus. I should have been braver. I should have fought harder." Students at MIT organized a rally 5,000 strong, professors canceling classes to attend in solidarity. The university president, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, announced that not only would Marcus's scholarship be honored, but MIT would establish a full-ride program for wrongfully convicted individuals seeking education after exoneration. "Education is liberation," she declared from the podium. We cannot undo the injustices of the past, but we can ensure that those who've suffered them have the tools to build a better future. Marcus Thompson represents not just the resilience of the human spirit, but the potential that's destroyed every time our justice system fails. The viral spread of the story reached international proportions, becoming a global conversation about justice and prejudice. The BBC ran a special report on systemic racism in American courts, interviewing British legal experts who expressed shock at the lack of oversight in the American judicial system. In the UK, such behavior would be impossible, said Lord Justice Hamilton. The checks and balances simply wouldn't allow one judge to wield such unchecked power for so long. Al Jazeera interviewed formerly incarcerated individuals about their experiences with biased judges, revealing patterns that transcended state lines and decades. Their investigation uncovered similar corruption in 17 states, with judges taking bribes from private prison companies, predetermined verdicts based on race, and systematic exclusion of black jurors. The report, titled America's Secret Injustice, won a Peabody Award and sparked congressional hearings. Le Monde published an editorial calling for global judicial reform, noting that America's problems were symptomatic of worldwide issues with prejudice in legal systems. The case of Marcus Thompson is not uniquely American, the editorial read. It's a mirror held up to all nations that claim to value justice while allowing prejudice to corrupt their courts. From France's treatment of North African defendants to Brazil's imprisonment of black youth, we all have our Harold Winchesters. The question is whether we have the courage to confront them. The United Nations Human Rights Council issued a statement expressing grave concern about racial disparities in American death penalty cases, calling for a moratorium until comprehensive reforms could be implemented. The right to a fair trial is fundamental to human dignity, the statement read. When that right is denied based on race, it's not just a legal failure, it's a crime against humanity. Social media became the battlefield where the war for justice was fought and won. The live stream of the courtroom confrontation was edited into dozens of viral clips, each highlighting different aspects of the injustice. Young activists created infographics showing the statistics of wrongful convictions. 1 in 25 death row inmates are innocent. Black men are 7 times more likely to be wrongfully convicted. The average time served before exoneration is 14 years. These images spread like wildfire, educating millions who'd never thought about the system's failures. Celebrities with massive platforms amplified the message. LeBron James tweeted, "This could have been my son. This could have been me. We can't keep letting this happen." Number Justice for Marcus. Number Change the System. The tweet was shared over 2 million times in the first hour, with other athletes adding their voices to the chorus. Oprah Winfrey announced she would produce a documentary series on wrongful convictions, with Marcus's case as the centerpiece of the first episode. "This story breaks my heart and fills it with hope at the same time," she said in a statement. "It shows us the worst of what we are and the best of what we can be. It reminds us that one voice, even a 17-year-old's voice, asking to call his father can change everything." Former President Obama released a lengthy statement that read in part, "Marcus Thompson's story reminds us that the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice only when we have the courage to bend it ourselves. For too long, we've allowed systemic racism to hide behind the robes of authority, to masquerade as law and order while destroying lives and families. Today, we saw what happens when truth confronts prejudice directly. Let this be not an ending, but a beginning, the start of the hard work of rebuilding a justice system worthy of the name." Within days, Congress fast-tracked the Marcus Act, the most comprehensive judicial reform legislation in American history. It required all courtrooms to have publicly accessible cameras, all death penalty cases to undergo federal review, all evidence to be shared with defense attorneys immediately, and all judges to undergo regular bias testing. The vote was overwhelmingly bipartisan, with even traditionally tough-on-crime legislators unable to defend what had been revealed. Senator Elizabeth Warren, speaking from the Senate floor, said, "We cannot bring back those who've been executed for crimes they didn't commit. We cannot restore the years stolen from the innocent. But we can ensure it never happens again." The Marcus Act isn't just legislation, it's a promise to every American that justice will no longer depend on the color of your skin or the size of your bank account. The Department of Justice established a new division specifically to investigate judicial misconduct. With a $500 million annual budget, and the authority to override state court decisions in cases of suspected bias. The Attorney General announced a comprehensive review of federal sentencing guidelines to address racial disparities, acknowledging that the problem was systemic rather than isolated. Law schools across the nation scrambled to add mandatory courses on implicit bias and judicial ethics. Harvard Law School created the Thompson Fellowship for students from underprivileged backgrounds pursuing careers in civil rights law, with Elijah Thompson himself serving on the selection committee. "We need lawyers who've lived the injustice they're fighting," he said at the program's launch, "who understand that behind every case is a human being, a family, a community." Yale established a clinic specifically focused on wrongful conviction cases, staffed by the nation's leading experts in forensic evidence and witness testimony. Stanford launched a research center studying the intersection of race and justice, using artificial intelligence to identify patterns of bias in judicial decisions. Within a year, their algorithm had identified 3,000 cases warranting review. Police academies instituted new training protocols emphasizing de-escalation and cultural sensitivity. The old warrior mentality was replaced with a guardian approach, focusing on protecting and serving all communities equally. The International Association of Chiefs of Police issued new guidelines on evidence collection and witness testimony, acknowledging that current practices had contributed to wrongful convictions. The American Bar Association updated its code of conduct to include stricter penalties for prosecutorial misconduct, including permanent disbarment for willful violation of defendants' rights. District attorneys who'd built careers on high conviction rates suddenly found themselves under scrutiny, their cases reviewed, their methods questioned. Several high-profile prosecutors resigned rather than face investigation. The Innocence Project, flooded with donations totaling $200 million in just a week, expanded operations to every state. They hired 500 new attorneys and investigators, opened 30 new offices, and launched a national database of potentially wrongful convictions. Their hotline received over 50,000 calls in the first month after Marcus's story went viral, each one a potential innocent person trapped in the system. Winchester's trial became the most watched legal proceeding in American history. The evidence against him was overwhelming and horrifying in its scope. Financial records showed he'd received over $3 million from private prison companies over his career. Emails revealed conversations where he discussed inventory and quotas, referring to human beings as products to be processed. Recordings captured him laughing about another one for the plantation, referring to the private prisons as modern slavery. Former court employees testified about his regular use of racial slurs in chambers, his practice of predetermining guilt based on defendants' appearance, his instructions to prosecutors on how to eliminate black jurors without appearing discriminatory. His own secretary, Margaret Collins, who'd worked for him for 15 years, broke down crying as she testified. "I knew it was wrong. I knew those boys were innocent, but I was scared. He had connections everywhere. He could have destroyed my life with one phone call. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to all the families. I should have spoken up." Several former prosecutors admitted they'd been pressured to pursue cases against black defendants regardless of evidence, with promises of endorsements for judicial positions if they maintained high conviction rates. One, Michael Harrison, testified, "Winchester told me, these people are guilty of something. If not this, then something else. We're doing society a favor by locking them up before they commit worse crimes. I was young and ambitious. I wanted to be a judge. So I did what he wanted. I've regretted it every day since." Winchester was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 45 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole, the maximum sentence for his crimes. As he was led away in shackles, he turned to look at Marcus one last time. The young man he'd tried to execute met his gaze steadily, without hatred, without satisfaction, only a deep sadness for the waste of it all, the lives destroyed, the families shattered, the potential squandered. Morrison received life in prison for multiple murders. Winchester Jr. and the other corrupt officers received 25 years each. Dozens of other officials, from prosecutors to legislators to prison executives, were convicted and sentenced. The corruption was so widespread that the federal government had to take over Alabama's justice system temporarily, appointing new judges and prosecutors to handle the caseload. But justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about restoration, healing, making whole what had been broken. 117 people wrongfully convicted by Winchester were released after case reviews, walking out of prisons across Alabama into the arms of families who'd never stopped believing in their innocence. Each received compensation from the state, though no amount could restore the years stolen from them. The scenes of reunion were broadcast nationwide, putting human faces on the statistics of injustice. Deshaun Williams, freed after 17 years for a robbery he didn't commit, stood outside the prison gates holding his daughter for the first time she'd been born 3 months after his wrongful conviction. "She's graduating high school next month," he said through tears that wouldn't stop flowing. "I missed her first words, first steps, first day of school, every birthday, every Christmas. I miss teaching her to ride a bike, helping with homework, scaring away boys. But at least I'll see her graduate. At least I'll walk her down the aisle someday. That's more than I thought I'd ever have." Jamal Patterson, released from life without parole, returned to find his mother had died believing he was a murderer. The prosecutors had told her the evidence was overwhelming, that she needed to accept what her son had done. At her grave, he left a copy of his exoneration papers weighted down with a stone, then sat and talked to her for hours, telling her about the lost years, the dreams deferred, the love that sustained him. "She knows now," he whispered to the headstone. "Wherever she is, she knows I didn't do it. She knows her baby was innocent." Andre Mitchell reunited with the woman who had been his fiancée before his conviction, who had waited 20 years for him despite everyone telling her to move on. They were married a week after his release in a ceremony attended by hundreds of supporters, fellow ex-honorees, and activists. "I knew he was innocent," she said at the reception. "I knew the man I loved could never have done what they said. But knowing and proving are different things. Thank God for Marcus Thompson. Thank God for Justice Thompson. Thank God for cameras and DNA and people who won't give up." The state of Alabama, facing hundreds of lawsuits and federal oversight, established a compensation fund of $2 billion for Winchester's victims. Each exoneree received a formal apology from the governor, their records completely expunged, and access to job training, education, and mental health services. Several major corporations, shamed by their previous indifference, announced they would actively recruit exonerees, recognizing the strength it took to survive wrongful imprisonment. Marcus himself was fully exonerated, all records expunged so thoroughly that it was as if the arrest had never happened. Alabama paid him $10 million in compensation money he immediately used to establish the Marcus Thompson Legal Defense Fund, providing free representation for those who couldn't afford lawyers. The fund's first case resulted in the exoneration of a 19-year-old who'd been wrongfully convicted using the same tactics Winchester had employed: suppressed evidence, coerced testimony, all-white jury. Random House offered Marcus $2 million for his memoir, which he titled The Call That Changed Everything. The book became an instant bestseller, required reading in many schools, translated into 30 languages. In the introduction, Marcus wrote, "This isn't just my story. It's the story of every innocent person who's ever stood in a courtroom and felt the weight of prejudice crushing them. It's the story of every mother who's had to tell her son to be careful not because of what he might do, but because of how he might be seen. It's the story of a system that needs to change, and the people brave enough to change it." Netflix produced a limited series about the case that won 15 Emmy Awards. The director, Ava DuVernay, said at the premiere, "This isn't entertainment. It's testimony. It's evidence. It's a mirror held up to America's face, asking us to see ourselves clearly and decide if we like what we see." Marcus returned to MIT that fall, no longer just another student, but a symbol of resilience and transformation. His professors noted his unique perspective in discussions about ethics and technology, how he challenged assumptions about algorithmic neutrality, how he questioned whether artificial intelligence could perpetuate the same biases that had nearly killed him. His thesis on using machine learning to identify patterns in wrongful convictions earned national attention and job offers from every major tech company. But Marcus had different plans. "I'm not interested in making rich companies richer," he told a recruiter from Google who offered him a starting salary of $500,000. "I'm interested in making sure no one else goes through what I went through. Technology can be a tool for justice or injustice. I want to make sure it's used for justice." 1 year later, Marcus stood in the same courtroom where he'd been sentenced to death. The room had been transformed for a judicial reform conference with 500 attendees, judges, attorneys, law students, ex-honorees, and activists. The podium stood exactly where he'd knelt in despair, but now it was a platform for change, for hope, for transformation. Elijah sat in the front row, no longer hiding their relationship, proud to watch his son command the room with quiet authority. They'd spent the past year traveling together, testifying before Congress, speaking at law schools, working on legislation. The father who'd had to stay away to protect his son now stood proudly beside him at every opportunity, their bond stronger for having been tested by fire. Marcus had cut his hair shorter but still wore it natural. A neat afro that he touched unconsciously as he began speaking, a gesture that had once been used to demean him, now a symbol of his identity and strength. "A year ago," he began, his voice steady and clear, carrying to every corner of the room and through the cameras to millions watching online, "I stood in this room as a condemned man. Not because of what I'd done, but because of who I was, or rather, who Judge Winchester decided I was based on my appearance." He paused, letting his words settle like sediment in still water. "My hair, my skin, my economic status, none of these things define my character. They're just facts about me, like my height or my eye color. But in this room, they became evidence of guilt. They became a death sentence, and 200 people watched it happen and said nothing." His voice grew stronger. "I don't hate them. I understand them. Fear is powerful. Speaking up against authority takes courage most of us don't know. We have until we're tested. But I ask them, and all of you, to remember that silence in the face of injustice is complicity. Every time we allow prejudice to masquerade as justice, we become part of the problem." Marcus smiled then, the expression transforming his face from serious to warm. "But we can also be part of the solution. Every person here, every person watching, has the power to create change. Whether you're a judge, a lawyer, a student, or simply a citizen, you can choose to speak up. You can choose to demand better. You can choose justice over comfort, truth over convenience, courage over complacency." He talked about forgiveness, how he'd visited Winchester in prison 3 times, each conversation going deeper into the roots of prejudice and the possibility of redemption. The 3rd time, he asked me to forgive him. And I did. Not for his sake, but for mine. Hate would make me like him, and I choose to be better. He's now teaching literacy to other inmates, trying to undo some of the harm he caused. It doesn't erase what he did, but it's a start. Marcus spoke about his grandmother, Rosa, now 85 and still fierce, who'd become a national symbol of faith and perseverance. She told me, "Baby, I never doubted you for a second. Not because you're perfect, but because I raised you. I know your heart." She's spoken at 50 churches this year, telling people that faith without action is just wishful thinking. He talked about his sister Maya, now 18 and headed to Howard University to study law. She watched them try to kill me for nothing, and instead of breaking her, it gave her purpose. She tells me she's going to be the kind of prosecutor who seeks truth, not just convictions. The standing ovation lasted 10 minutes, 500 people on their feet, many crying, all understanding they'd witnessed not just a speech but a generational moment. Outside, a bronze plaque had been newly installed. On this site, injustice was conquered by truth, dedicated to all those still fighting for their day in court. As the sun set over Alabama on the 2nd anniversary of his exoneration, Marcus stood before the United States Senate, testifying in support of a constitutional amendment guaranteeing the right to competent counsel and unbiased judgment. The amendment passed unanimously, enshrining protections that should have always existed. Marcus Thompson had been one phone call away from death. That call hadn't just saved his life, it had exposed a system's failures and sparked a movement for change that would echo through generations. Have you ever stood by while witnessing injustice, afraid to speak up? Marcus Thompson nearly died because 200 people chose silence over truth. Every day, thousands more like Marcus wait for someone, anyone, to stand up for them. If this story moved you, share it. Let others know that justice isn't a spectator sport. Comment with your own experiences of injustice, witnessed or endured. Like and follow for more stories about courage, justice, and the power of truth. Most importantly, learn about the Innocence Project in your area. Sign petitions for judicial reform. Attend town halls. Vote for prosecutors and judges who prioritize justice over conviction rates. Because justice doesn't arrive on its own, it's built by ordinary people who refuse to kneel before injustice. Today, that person could be you. As Marcus says, "One phone call saved my life, but speaking up saves society." As Elijah reminds us, true power isn't standing above others, it's standing up for others. Justice isn't self-generating, It's constructed by brave hearts who refuse to bow before wrongdoing. The question is, will you be one of them?